Right, good evening everyone. We're now moving to the discussion part of the evening. So we're currently still missing one panelist. She might still be coming. So we'll start without her. I think there's something going on at the United Nations Palace. So we have Dia Ionesco here, head of the Migration, Environment and Climate Change Division at the International Organization for Migration. There's a microphone. And Sam Turpin, who is a photojournalist and the director of Humans and Climate Change Stories project. That's right. Okay, so we'll discuss for around, say, 20 minutes, maybe a bit longer, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions. My name is Eva. I'll be moderating this panel tonight. I'm a visiting fellow here at the Graduate Institute, and I work on law of the sea-related issues. So I'm also from the Netherlands. So I was born at, I think, -6 meters below sea level. And I think, for me, in any case, watching this documentary, it raised, well, many issues, and it really made me reflect. So I can't wait to hear from our panelists about this issue. And I think we'll just start with Samuel. So, especially as a photojournalist, you know, and working in this field, this particular documentary, you know, what stands out for you? What did you think about the way that it was set up and the story from
thanks for being there. And Eva, I've noticed 4 points, maybe. The first point is about the movie itself. You know, I'm dealing with media every day, and every day the director of photography service asked me about, do you have some dramatic picture, please? We would like to see some dramatic pictures, please. Yes, why? Because we have to shock people. Oh, okay. Maybe climate change is more subtle, like erosion. It's something that happens every day, every single day. And of course, climate change is also some natural disaster and so on. But actually, this movie is exactly what we would like to show with the Humans and Climate Change project. This is a mid-term or long-term issue. And it's very, very difficult to show in the media. And maybe we have to find some new forms of storytelling. And maybe this form of storytelling is linked to the form of thinking and approach we should have with the climate change. So this is the first point.
And with your particular project, do you find, so you also take this slower approach where you try to, you know, to really get that feeling of, you know, not just dramatic events and
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, the project offers a documentary approach of the climate change. We follow 12 families in all over the world over a course of 10 years. We do 4 stories per year. That means at the end of the year 3, we have the first chapters with the 12 families, and then starting the year 4, we will start the second chapter with the families and so on. And yes, we need time. Absolutely, we need time. Why? Because first, you have to build trust and confidence with the family. It's not only a one-shot story. And it's not only a media project. It's a big human adventure. And this is our adventure. This is the adventure of the humans facing climate change. So we need this. And it's fascinating how you can, for example, in Greenland, the first 2 weeks I stay with the family. The family is some fishermen in a very small village in the west coast of the Greenland. It's about 120 people in this village. It's very, it's a village like many others in the west coast. And when I asked Niels Morgard, the fisherman, but I did not mention the climate change, but how the environment change. Did he observe how the nature change around and so on, but not climate change? And he said, yes, he is aware about all the change of nature, but is very reluctant to talk about climate change. For him, it's a cycle of the nature. It will be back. It's like that. And ancestors have known some such cycles of nature. So it's not a problem. But climate change is something that, oof.
Yeah, I find it really interesting how also here, so over 2 years, you know, they follow these people, and you see, like you say, different things emerge over time. You might not see them at the beginning. They might not see them at the beginning. So I don't know, Dina, if you found that, did they cover all the aspects that you think, you know, on this particular topic? Is this, of course, it's comprehensive in a way, but is there something that you really think they left out, or that could have been added to this?
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be here in this beautiful place, by the way, Maison de la Paix. I find this movie sincerely amazing. It's really touching, and I find that Mathieu, who made the movie, managed to get the questions around migration and climate change amazingly well, because he showed all the contrasts and all the complexity. So he managed to speak of the beauty of the oceans and the violence of the ocean. He managed to speak of realities and perceptions. He managed to speak of the world, the nature, and the way we treat the world and the nature, and the way we treat people. He managed to speak about staying, living. He spoke of the past and amazing science future. So I think it's just very well captured. He captured the complexity of all the debate around migration, environment, climate change, disaster issues. And he captured the politics, the language that you have, the maybe let's call it blah, 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 blah. And then these people singing, wondering what they will do next, how they will do, and the questions around action. How do you fund it? There is money in this. There are questions about solutions. And I think also we have to contextualize this movie, because it's also, we are in a new phase now. President Tong is not president anymore, and we had the chance also to welcome the president at IOM's, the International Organization for Migration Council. And I found that he captured also very well how humble he is and how extraordinary this man is. And all the sensitivities around the debate, because if you say we should help people stay, some people are not happy. They think we should allow people to move. And if we say we should help people move, some people are not happy, because we think that we are losing hope in mitigation, adaptation, and don't allow people to go. So I really find it's a very good way of framing. And maybe one extra thing I find extraordinary, it's because of climate and migration. You can speak about this issue politically. You can speak about the issue a lot in legal ways. It's a lot of very complex human rights and legal frameworks issues. And you can speak about this artistically. And maybe artistically, and this I find with Samuel, we see this as well. Maybe it's the best way, in fact, to talk about it.
Yeah, and the human connection, of course. And I think we talked about this a bit before, that you know, these different points in the story that really stand out. I don't know if you wanted to say a bit more about that, but how in this movie, I think you mentioned, and also in your project, you have these different elements that are really, really important, that kind of stand out, this human connection.
Of course, as I said, it's firstly a big human adventure, and I would like to highlight two points connected with human. As Dina said, the movie shows how some factors are interconnected. Economic, political aspects, and security aspects. We could talk about this in the story we produced in Mali, but also the cultural aspect, and it's very important. We too often forget to talk about the cultural aspects. This is one point I would like to highlight. All families and populations I meet in my daily life, they don't want to leave. They would like to stay. Of course, they would like to stay because of the culture, because of the connection with the nature, because of the connection with ancestors, with the land, with the sky, with the sea, with everything. We can see the Sermary, the woman who moved to Netherlands. Is she happy to be there? Well, we wonder. We don't know. Maybe in the future, maybe. But yeah, this is something new. But she is disconnected with many things, and it's I could work about this aspect. But it's very important to understand that the culture is too often forgotten in these aspects. Yeah.
And I think that's also, they spoke a bit about buying land in Fiji, and I think Kiribati has bought a plot of land, but you would have those issues exactly, right? They're not in their land, and they would be in someone else's. They might not have the same rights. There are these interconnected issues of legal rights, and I don't know if you have an idea of how could one solve that even. Please, any? Yeah.
You want to say something? No? I think this is a very practical question. So, of course, we are in a movie, so it's the artistic voice that speaks, and I think it's also emotion, so it touches upon very deep things. But I think migration also, we have to realize it's quite a natural thing in human history. And for anyone who has migrated, and I'm sure that there are loads of people who are migrants here, either for labor or for studies or for love. I don't know, I can do a raising hands who thinks is a migrant, or so. Yeah, I see already immediately. Yes, you see? So we all know that migration, I think it depends how it happens, in fact, in which way, if you are, which kind of channel you have to migrate. But I think also from a human perspective, what's amazing is that you both gain and lose. And you both can be happy and sad. So it's a very human thing. And I think he captured that very well. They lose things, but they gain things. And they say the little girl, you are a Kiwi. So it brings a whole new dimension. But I think for the land issue in the Pacific, and Pacific, it's extremely forward-looking on this theme at political and policy level. So it's very concrete things happening. There are a lot of discussions and programs and projects around having a regional framework of agreement for people to be allowed to move in a region. There is a lot of forward thinking from Fiji as a receiving country on what kind of rights, what kind of status, what kind of nationality people would have by coming in. So there are very concrete discussions from receiving and sending countries. And I would say also the movie, of course, it's about very emblematic sea level rise, small island states that are at the forefront. But if you think of all low-lying lands in the world, in deltas and Netherlands or in Europe, we do have that. I think it's an issue for much broader than just the small islands. But from a policy perspective, it's a question also whether this migration is internal or international. And we have to just realize also that the majority of migration in the context of climate change and environmental change and loss of resources and degradation of ecosystems, it's internal. So it's very much about internal management of migration and urban issues, agriculture, food, land management, rather than necessarily about rights abroad, protection abroad. But of course, these questions are also posed. But a lot, it's also about development issues. That's the complexity of this whole debate.
But that makes you think also, like, to what extent is this any different? I mean, you say that we've always migrated, also always because of environmental reasons. So it is, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. To what extent is this completely different, and should we respond any differently? You know.
From my side, I think it's very ironic, and your question goes to a very important point, because for the last, I would say, 20 years, 15 years, and extremely an accelerated path the past 5 years, what we've done is to isolate the environmental and climate change factors. So we made a huge effort to show the importance of these drivers. And we managed politically to bring it up on the climate change agenda, the migration issues, and on the migration issue, the climate change agenda. So we moved a lot forward. We showed the importance. And I think it's very ironic, because now what we need to do is the contrary, to show again how much everything is connected. And our whole work is about mainstreaming and integrating and having to partner with absolutely everyone about it. But I think we had to isolate and bring to the spotlight the environmental issues, because they were hidden. They were hidden in economic, labor issues. And when you do research on this topic, if you ask why did you move, people will say because I lost my job. And it's only if you ask the second question, why did you lose your job, that maybe because of drought or change in rainfall patterns. So I think it's, from me working in an organization dealing with migration, I really think it's a main question for migration. And if I may just say one thing, for me, climate change and environment, it's almost a chance for the migration world to rethink contemporary migration policy and practice, because we'll have to think mobility because of climate change and environment much more. So in a way, it's not about reinventing the wheel, but making migration solutions work also for environmental issues. So it's a bit ironic. It's almost like I'm cutting my own si la branche sur laquelle je suis assise. But it's really, I think, yes, we have to isolate and realize it's part of the bigger picture.
I think you also have some...
maybe one example in Mali. In Mali, the story produced in Mali, 80% of people lived with subsistence. Because of the rising of temperature, because of the desert, and how the rainfall are decreasing, there is a huge competition around the natural resources, especially the water and arable lands. And the population is growing too, and we follow in our story 3 generations, grandparents, parents, and their son and daughter. And the grandmother said, but I've 72 years old. I've never seen people here in our communities, different communities, 2 or 3 different communities, who fight for water. And now what happened? Is it a punishment from God? But you see, Usman is a farmer, agro-pastoralist, and he showed how now it's very difficult for him to make his family survive with only agriculture. And when you link this with people who fled the conflict since 2012, the authorities are a bit surprised because they didn't do the link. And they are embarrassed because they have no real answers. And you know, so first, the conflicts in the north of the Mali was a problem of militarist group coming from Libya and so on, ACMI, Daesh. No, it's not. Because the youth, so the son and daughter of Usman, they have no solutions and they have no perspectives. They know that they can't stay here and have a good life. They know that. So they have three options. The first one is to move to Bamako or Ouagadougou and have some hot jobs. The second option is to go to mining. Third option is to go to Europe. And one son is now in Libya. And another option is to just because the state and authorities have abandoned the region, no justice services, no security, no education, and so on. They have to deal with the conflict between herders, farmers, fishermen. They do justice by themselves, and they protect by themselves. So another option they have is to become a military and in military groups, militias, self-defense militias.
And there you touch upon an interesting thing, and it's also not only the interlinkages and how can you think about it, but also response, of course. How do you respond to that? So, of course, in terms of prevention, but also maybe the international response. And I think I want to ask you that question before we open up to the floor. Is also how. So your division was created in 2015, so that's fairly recent. And what is its role in addressing these issues? And has anything come out of it that could help with these challenges that we've just highlighted?
No, I think it's, if you look at the history of environmental migration, you'll see how the IPCC reports, IOM's action, the COPs, the migration policy world have evolved in parallel. So at IOM's level, there has been really an investment in bringing environmental issues on the forefront. And it was a bit of a struggle, I think. And in the same time, it's a very interesting organization because we have the chance of being also in the field operational. So we had, in a way, bottom up, like boiling up from down up requests from our colleagues in the field to address situation of disaster displacement in particular, and then more of a top-down vision that climate change cannot be ignored anymore and have an impact on how migration policy has to respond. So when these two met, in a way, this division was created on the request of our member states. So it's an intergovernmental organization. So it's a good barometer of also showing states' interest. So what has changed, I think, we moved, I think, really in this debate from complete darkness and invisibility of environmental migrants to, I think, overexposure and a bit of a fashion almost. So I'm a bit worried that we are moving maybe too much in discourse. And I think with our work in the organization, first of all, it's not the division is just the tip of the iceberg that shows that the whole organization has to invest now in environmental and climate change. So it's an organization-wide challenge and opportunity. But I think what has changed is that we know now that we have to provide I call this like a fan of activities and proposals. There's no one solution, but I think I am very optimistic in spite of the very negative discourse around this topic, because I think there are hundreds of millions of solutions. And some of the solutions are about helping people to just stay so that we reduce the forced form of migration. Yeah. So it's about investing in ecosystems, it's about investing in climate change solutions, so investing in disaster risk reduction, in insurance issues like it said in the movie. There are solutions about helping people who are already on the move, so that's a second big set of actions. That's really about, I think, humanitarian protection, human rights discussions, assistance to people, reducing the risk of trafficking during displacement due to a natural disaster. So that's a whole world of solutions. And then I think we have also, as IOM, really to care for the solutions that are helping people to move in a dignified way, as the President Tong was saying. So that's a whole set of just being very practical about migration. And I think that too much when we speak of migration, it's just politics. And in fact, I really think it's so practical. You know, it's about visa systems, agreements, consular services. It's about humanitarian status if you move because of a disaster. It's about forward-looking regional collaboration. It's about bilateral agreements. It's about family reunification, I can go like this forever. It's practical, it's concrete. It's not just this whatever scare or angelism or diabolization of the discourse. I think it's concrete, and there are many things that can be done. And I'm happy in a way, I feel very fortunate to be able to work in this community, though I must say also working with states, and we are of course not quoted. It's not always easy because sometimes it's the lowest denominator, but that's about working in an intergovernmental organizations, about supporting this dialogue. And there, like the progress, it's very important.
Well, I think that's a really good positive note to finish this part on.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think we'll...
not depress.
No, let's not depress, but that's great to hear. You know, there are actually solutions on the ground and things are being done. And there are different types of options, you know, you don't just look at
But much more has to be done.
But much more has to be done. Great, so I think I'll open up to the floor for questions. So there are microphones around. So I think raise your hand. So I see a question over there. And I think it would be good to keep the questions short, to the point, and just say who you are before you ask a question.
Hi, I'm David Shepherd. I was head of the Pacific Regional Agency for the Environment for 6 years. I appreciated the film, visited Kiribati many times, February this year. Just 4 observations. One is the extreme issue of vulnerability. So, Eva, you said, what's different about this? And the fact is, in the Pacific, they have 3 of the 5 lowest islands on Earth. So what's different is you're looking at sovereign nations disappearing entirely. But I think, as you said, Dina, there are practical actions, and in fact, it wasn't shown in the film, but there are many practical adaptation, mitigation measures. A second point is leadership. So Anote Tong is fantastic. He needs to be encouraged. The current president, when I was there in February, that film is banned. They don't show it because it's seen as being defeatist and also minimising chances of donor funding. So that's an issue. We saw President Obama, and we have an incredible contrast. So I think Anote captured it, that we have to look beyond 3 or 4 year political cycles if we're really going to have an impact. Third point is rights. The issue of rights of people from Kiribati in Fiji. Kiribati people were relocated to Solomon Islands about 50 years ago, and they're still having great difficulty adapting. And what's significant in the Pacific is that all land, virtually all land, is customarily owned, very little state land. So any movement of people has to be with and through local communities in the host country. And the fourth and final point is the issue of marine resources. Kiribati, although it wasn't shown, is a very rich country because of its extremely rich tuna fisheries, about 85% of the GDP. What happens when sea level rises? The exclusive economic zone is 200 nautical miles from the low tide zone. So that when the islands disappear, what happens? So that's also one of the reasons why Pacific countries at the moment are rapidly demarcating their exclusive economic zones to at least address that. So, sorry, they're not questions, but they're observations.
No, thank you. Do you want to comment on any of that?
I think it's completely spot on, and the question of human rights is key in this whole nexus, because it's also about internal migration and about international migration and regional issues. And the Human Rights Council has really taken this up on, and now we have also one council resolution that speaks of migrants in the context of climate change and human rights. And this, again, 5 years ago, there was none of this. These topics were not in, like migration was not in the climate text for 11 COPs, climate conferences, and there was nothing on the migration side moving till the Global Compact on migration, and there was nothing in the human rights till 2018, nor in SDGs, nor in the urban agenda, nor in the humanitarian domain. So it's a moment of change. Whether it leads to action, I think it's a big question, and there's a complexity also. And what you said as well, I think how we see at IOM, for instance, we've done research on ocean acidification, coral change, ecosystem loss, impact on fishermen and migration. But you see, when you speak with people who work on ecosystems and ocean and oceanographs, and on the other side with people working on migration, it's like two foreign languages. So there's a big effort also on connecting all these agendas, that it's currently maybe in focus at international level, maybe more than action, because sometimes I think policymakers don't really know what action to take because of these huge, immense issues. So that's why I think you can take loads of small actions, but not one single action will ever address this whole complex issue.
And I think I'll just pitch in on the last thing. So it's interesting to note that at the International Law Association, they actually worked on those, I'm sure you know that, on those 3 legal questions related to sea level rise. So, of course, statehood, migration, but also maritime boundaries. And I think they passed recommendations last year in any case that those maritime boundaries shouldn't change. So even if your baselines are receding, or at least your natural baselines, that they should be kept. For legal certainty, they should be kept where they are. And I think they drew on practice in the Pacific to say, well, that is at least developing as what could be customary law on the issue, which of course would then create a question of how big are your internal waters, because if you recede in your territorial sea stays out there, that raises other questions. But yeah, these are obviously really valid. Any comment? Yeah.
You were talking about leadership. Honestly saying, we have to talk about courage and goodwill too. Just one example in Greenland. When I interviewed the authorities, as you know, ice melting is now opening some new opportunities for Arctic and Greenland. So some new shipping routes, oil exploitation, rare earths exploitation, and as you know, we need some rare earths because 80% of rare earths is coming from China, and we need for our phone, for tablets, and so on, and solar panels too. And what else? Yes, and they have another resource now is fishing, because the fishing stocks are very high because of many fish are living and going up to cold water. And the authorities are working with some scientists and some committees, but as a matter of fact, the last 6 or 7 years, they don't follow the quotas they discussed with.
That's a universal problem, unfortunately.
No. Niels Molgaard, the fisherman I stayed with, he told me, Sam, no, climate change is an opportunity for me. I'm sorry to say this is an opportunity for me, because I can fish 7 or 8 months per year. 10 years ago, it was only 3 or 4 months, 4 months, 3 or 4 months in the year, and not 8 months. But the problem is the authorities, because they are eager to gain independence from Denmark, because it's a territory of Denmark, they would like to gain economical independence and then political independence. They encourage the fishermen to fish more and more and more and more. So Niels has invested in big boats to go further and to fish more and more. Yes, but he told me, no, I'm in debt. But when I was there last year, there were no fish anymore.
But I think here you go into an actual dispute. I mean, this creates so many disputes. You're absolutely right. It's a huge issue in general. So yeah.
So he's in debt, and he's now if he has two bad seasons while fishing,
that's it.
this is Ian.
Yeah.
And he told me, you know, Sam, I didn't go to school. I don't know writing, counting, and my skills are only how to read the ice, how to read the sky, the wind, the sea, and animals. And now my problem is I don't know what to do then. Yeah. And he told me, I remember this day, he told me, you know, it's scaring because I don't know what to transfer to my kids right now.
I think these are problems that are so, like you say, they're so poignant, and they're so they go much further than the issue that we're even discussing here. But no, good. Thanks for your observations. Are there any more questions that we can add? They see a hand over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Defne Gönenç. The film clearly shows how urgent action is needed. However, unfortunately, the film is also showing Paris Agreement as a success story. In my opinion, if we are going to be sincere about the urgency required, we need to be very careful about what we call as a success story. I would like to ask you your ideas about Paris Agreement, particularly about, the migration dimension of the climate change issue. Do you think, I mean, right now we are left on the table with an agreement such as Paris Agreement, and we nearly all know that there is barely anything in the agreement, concretely speaking. So what should we do? I mean, we should just scrap the agreement and actually call for something concrete, which will probably obtain a bit less consensus, or we should rather promote Paris Agreement. What are your ideas?
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I really think there's a story with these climate conferences, and you know that I went to the first climate conference in 2011, and I was tasked by IOM to organize a side event on migration, and I was asked to merge my side event with 12 other side events that dealt with the human dimensions of climate change. So we ended up with an event that spoke of health, and so it was interesting. But then last year I counted 45 events in Katowice dealing with migration. 45 events, and for the first time last year we had one official side event of the not just of the UN or not just of civil society, but connected really to the climate secretariat as well, and to the negotiators. So I think for me the Paris Agreement has been a turning point nevertheless, because it has recognized the word migrants in the preamble. So in a way it's just about the words, but I think it's an amazing anchorage, because now I can say all the time that there's migrants in the preamble and use it all over for all our fundraising opportunities. And plus, until the Paris Agreement, there has been a lot of talking about migration in the adaptation and vulnerability world. So it was migration, displacement, and planned relocations since Cancun that were mentioned. But we move little by little migration in the loss and damage world. So it has taken different aspects. And the Paris Agreement has also created and established, tasked the loss and damage program to have a task force on displacement and migration. So the task force has worked for 2 years, and I had the chance to be part of the 13 members of the task force for representing IOM. And we worked very, very hard, I must say. I must also tell you that there was no resource given to the task force to do the job, so we invested, each of us, in doing this work, and there was also a big stakeholder meeting, and the task force presented recommendations that were really endorsed at the last COP in Katowice, and we will start the new work of the task force now, 1st of July. So I really think these agreements are not like the achievement of they have to be taken for what they are, but I find it's quite amazing that migration got there. And it offers an anchorage, and it offers a lot of work that can be done. So just to give you as an example, what we'll do we propose for the new task force to do, for instance, guidelines to support states who want to apply to the Green Climate Fund on developing projects with a migration dimension. So we'll have very concrete guidelines. So it's not necessary action, but it's because it also takes time to put in place the knowledge, the data, the awareness, the tools, and the action. So for me, I think it's important. And also another argument pro this whole thing is that if you look at the Global Compact on migration, it quotes also the Paris Agreement. And if you look, all those, the Katowice decision quotes the Paris Agreement and the Global Compact. So it's like building a bit Legos. You put one brick and one brick and one brick, or it's more like a mayonnaise you beat, depending if you prefer a food metaphor over a game metaphor. But I really think that it's in the world of governance at the international multilateral level, I still think it's very important to have it. But it requires a lot of leadership and will and money and concrete action to take it forward. But without this, we wouldn't have had the opportunity even to be with the negotiators, or to put internal displacement in the recommendations, or to work on slow onset and not just on sudden onset. So I think there's a lot of progress. I really think it's amazing. But it's progress in my world. It's not necessarily progress in their world, in the world of fishermen, in the world. That's the reality of our world. But at least I work on this, so I find in that area I work, I see progress.
So don't scrap it, but do more.
Maybe another positive point, not maybe not on this topic, but another one. You know, you just told that something is moving and it's not that bad. It's pretty positive. This is the same for media. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, media considers climate change only like an environmental issue, and only. So when you when you visit the media with a story, you meet only the Department of Environment. Now, you can meet political, economic department. And then you can enter and make that the issue can be considered with economic aspect and political aspect. But you know, media have to move too. In general, they are too, I could say shy. No, it's not shy. No. No. They are eager to do more, really. But to be honest, they are facing with priorities and financial priorities. And they know that to do such movie or a story in long-term story, you need money. You need to dedicate 1, 2, or 3 journalists to do. So they can do.
Oh, and I think the issue of funding was something they really touched upon in the movies, and it's a huge issue. So I don't know if actually, I'm just going to sneak in with a quick question, but at the international level, you talked briefly about funding or guidelines. But is there any specific funding mechanism? We haven't really...
No, for the moment, there's no specific to environment or climate change migration, but I think there are so many available funds that we should be able to showcase the issue. And IOM has its own development fund that has also supported capacity building on migration, environment, and climate change in a few projects. And there are more and more donors who support the connection. But I think in terms of funding, it's also at national level, also at individual level, at private level, that it's changing. There's a lot of awareness also for campaigns that are at individual level to contribute. And also from our perspective, there's also a huge chance to showcase the positive dimension of migration by showing the power of migrant and diaspora investments. And we are trying to have now some programs that we call a bit the greening. We green more traditional areas of migration, and one of them can be working with diasporas who invest back home in projects that are about water management or land, interconnected. And also another example of that is the returning migrants who are reintegrated with packages that are also trying to be focused on green jobs. So there is a connection, but I think the money, I mean, it's still difficult, but and we touch upon complex things like climate justice and...
Should we take another? Oh, you wanna?
Another reality, and just in few words, in terms of money, the problems of foundation that where I received some big offer from foundation, but from Total or from BNP Paribas.
Interesting.
So can I consider this or not? No, not for the moment. But
So
you know, that's a real problem, an ethical problem. I mean, they are ready to offer some money. Yeah.
Well, in a way, it's a bit of complicity, isn't it? And try and mitigate. Well, let's not get into that. All right, interesting. Is there any other questions? Raise your hand. No, then I think we're going to wrap up. So I think, well, this was a really interesting discussion we've had. So a round of applause. Thanks very much. So yeah, something to take home and to think about the interconnectivity of all things and all the different options on the table. And let's continue this debate over the next couple of years. So thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.